Welcome to my video, A Theory of Everything.
A theory of everything brings everything together, all of the forces and mass, to explain how our world works. Cause and effect is one of the strongest pieces of logic we have. If you have an effect or an outcome, it has to have a cause. It's as simple as that. Forces should not be given a free pass. A fundamental theory should explain how forces operate. To leave out a comprehensible explanation of what forces are is to allow magic to exist. It will be a wounded and incomplete theory that allows them to do so. Let's clarify a little further what a good theory looks like in this context. To do this, I will offer an example. Let's say an alien was postulating on how to build a brick wall. Let's say his first guess is that bricks are made of jello. Naturally, he finds that the theory collapses, but instead of abandoning that idea, he applies a patch. He says, maybe there is an uplift force that keeps the wall vertical, and so he has fixed his theory. And not only that, the mass and the formulas all work perfectly, even though the theory is untrue. Then he observes someone leaning out against the brick wall, so he has to patch up his theory once again, strengthening the jello with a brittleness force. And as things progress, he'll need more and more patches to fix the theory, which is fundamentally untrue. There are dozens of types of patches to choose from. A lessening of gravity, a scalar factor which reduces the weight of the bricks the higher the wall gets, and other mysterious factors. Contrast this with the situation of his knowing about the constituents of brick. In other words, if he had the right building block, not only would he not need any patches to build the wall, predictions about the exact force needed to break a brick, what a brick sounds like, and a host of other properties would be suggested and found to be true. His theory would hold up, and it would predict well. So evidently, a great deal of care should be taken in selecting the primary block of our universe, and I will demonstrate that if we choose the right brick, we can travel easily into the field with a few clear observations. The results, I have to say, will astonish you. Physicists, according to Feynman, find the idea of building the universe with dimension obvious. They do so because there's simply no other building material available. Everything has been constructed except for dimension, so everything must be constructed from dimension. We can use an axiom to start things off. Space can either be continuous or it can be broken up into pieces. Well, if space was continuous, all particles would have to be pulses, and that makes no sense. Pulses don't collide like particles, and the generation of a wave that does not dissipate out into space is very difficult. And if you have a dissipated wave landing on a distant planet, the idea that there is some sort of funnel or elastic to collect all that energy and information back to a point to remake the particle seems impossibly unlikely. The more you think about the idea of things being pulses that spread out, making particles, the more it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to go with the idea right now of space that's been broken up into fragments, making up the world that we know. So within this context, let's look at what could make a basic particle. Let's look at the obvious shape, a sphere. Well, this is an option, but it has several problems. It needs to have some sort of shell to hold itself together. This is not logical. Space is not hard. You cannot make something hard out of dimension. The other option is that the sphere is somehow adhesive. Again, we know that space is simply not adhesive to itself, or it would take energy to pass through it, and we would notice the universe grinding to a halt. There would have to be some special condition whereby space is adhesive in a particle and not adhesive outside it, which does not seem like a worthwhile proposition. If we propose that a fundamental particle is a tiny piece of vibrating string, things become very difficult to explain. We have to have two magical forces, one to hold the rope together to keep it tough, another one to keep the rope taut, and a magical supply of energy to keep the vibrations going. That's a lot of magic to explain without a plausible explanation. The same thing goes for many of the potential building blocks. They suffer from the shell problem and cohesion problems. In fact, all of them do, aside from a ring vortex, which is a phrase describing a smoke ring-like structure. We know that such vortices exist, and Helmholtz at the beginning of the 19th century worked out mathematically that such vortices will self-sustain indefinitely in a frictionless medium. It is a logical solution in a couple of ways. First, it gets past the difficulty of needing a hard or cohesive space to form a particle, and secondly, it's useful in that it's a single solution. We are immediately forced to accept a single clear winner here, the only answer which does not need forces or peculiar properties to self-sustain. Numerous other advantages come to mind. It can link to other vortices in numerous ways, which might be useful in building a family of particles. It is dispersed in space, which might fit in with Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. They can collide and glance off each other like particles. And one very important feature is that they can shed from the surface of an accelerated sphere. This means we can say that if space is fragmented, given the unimaginable number of types of interactions since time began, they almost certainly exist. In fact, if Helmholtz is right, the universe should contain many vortices, though there are many reasons why, outside of ideal mathematical conditions, they will break down and not live indefinitely. I guess this is another advantage to the vortice. It does not need a special factory for their production. They can arise due to the natural motions which might be found in a fragmented medium where volumes of space collide. A couple of bricks in our wall have found their place, and we have not used any magic fields, weird stuff, or horrible assumptions to keep it coherent. And we have sort of created a miracle. From something utterly without mass, just mere dimension, we have created things, vortices that bounce off each other. We call things that do that particles, and they have produced the illusion of mass. It's a physicist's version of a rabbit out of a hat. Mass has been created from the massless medium of space, and we can replace m in Einstein's E equals mc squared formula with relative velocities of volumes of space. So let's interrogate this proposition. Let's see if it holds up to some difficult questions. The very most difficult questions are posed by the electron. It has some incredibly weird behaviours. Let's see how far logic can take us, explaining quantum behaviour in terms of Newtonian mechanics. If we look at the famous electron slit experiment, we find that electrons emit waves, and the waves interfere with their movement, and instead of going straight through, they're shifted around. In this example, a single electron is going to the upper slit, the waveform to the bottom slit. The interesting thing here is that the electron actually has to emit waves in advance of itself, otherwise the waveform cannot reach the electron in time to interfere with its motion. A simple bow wave would arrive too late. It is also known that electrons emit electromotive force in electric currents, well in advance of the motion of the actual electron. How can this possibly happen given the conservation of energy? Surely this makes no sense. It is a wonderfully unusual problem for which again the vortice and its very unusual properties come to the rescue. The answer comes in the form of a leapfrogging vortice, or as I will refer to them here as a co-linked vortice. Again, these self-sustain, and as part of their cyclic motion, a pulse is thrown out at a greater speed than the speed of the vortices combined. No other construction can do this without violating the law of conservation of energy. In other words, say we had a vibrating sheet as an idea that threw out waves, we would constantly need to power that sheet with wave energy, which we cannot do within the confines of non-magical physics. On reflection, you can see that only a co-linked vortice has a remarkable ability to collect energy from the surrounding medium and emit waves in front of it. All other theories break down here in some way. It is a huge hurdle for these vortices to leap over. So wouldn't it be great if we had video evidence of this happening? Well, it so happens we do. This incredible experiment was performed courtesy of Morrison et al. It shows the momentum distribution around an electron which is travelling in a sinusoidal path through space. The ripples around the central body are called standing waves, and standing waves are produced by a distinct process. They are produced by waves colliding from different directions, as you can see here. The electron sends out advance waves, as we have seen, and all we need is for some to bounce back, or for some to come from an electron in advance of this one, to produce this standing wave pattern. So what we see here is the combination of the bow wave, the circular outgoing wave, and the reflected or incoming wave from another electron. 3 waves interfering to produce that pattern. Another interesting feature of the video is the fact that it is polarized. The most aerodynamic shape of a vortice may be slightly tilted. In other words, if you tilt a vortice, it has less space to push out of the way, so it may try and tilt. As it does so, the leading edge swells, and the drag increases so that it gets pulled back, and you have this rocking motion as the top of the electron swells, falls back, then the bottom of the electron swells, then falls back. There is also a form of this where the swollen edge slowly rotates around the edge, like a plate spun in the air, really, that kind of motion. So it provides an explanation of the characteristic we call polarization. An electron can be polarized into linear travel or circular travel. It goes without saying that the variety of bodies which can produce the image produced by the video, including the polarization, is limited to one, the co-linked vortice. There's no choice here. That is to say, there's no choice if you want to stay within normal space. If the electron simply had bland billiard ball behaviours and we had no images, innumerable possibilities for the structure of an electron would still be possible. But here, every new behaviour eliminates possibilities, and these highly unusual behaviours eliminate all choices and force us to accept the co-linked vortice as a solution to the problem, what is an electron? So let's look at the flow of fragmented space. We have a low pressure area at the front and a higher pressure area at the back. So in this media, which is a superfluid, we can see a cycle starting to form around the electron, a little like this. When I first realized this, my jaw dropped. Because indeed, electrons are small magnets. This is exactly what you would hope to see if you're building a model of an electron. I had no idea this would turn up when I started looking at this. I simply wanted to form the most logical building block, and it was quite frustrating at first because I didn't think of the vortice. I thought of spheres and all these typical things that you go through, and realised how inadequate they were in so many different ways, and they would fall apart. How could they be produced in the first place? What makes them? All that sort of stuff. And so it was wonderful when I first thought of vortices, how easily everything suddenly comes together. Then I was delighted to see that it replicated the Moritzen video, and now, totally unexpectedly, really, it shows the electromagnetic force pattern. So let's double check this works like a magnet and see if the many thousand-year-old mystery of magnetic force has found a new, logical, coherent explanation. If opposite poles are put together, there should be an attraction. Does this hold true? Well, first of all, it is clear that the flow patterns add up correctly to form a larger magnetic field pattern. Now, what happens when we try and pull them apart? The higher the velocity of a fluid, the lower the pressure it exerts. This is called Bernoulli's principle. So the central area is a low pressure volume surrounded by a high pressure volume. So effectively, as we try and pull the magnets apart, it is like pulling a cork out of a bottle. We are extending the low pressure volume and pushing the high pressure volume back, which takes energy. If we put like poles together, we can see whichever way the flow is going, we are pushing against the rushing momentum of fragmented space. It looks like the central flow is cut off here, which weakens the overall magnetic strength of the magnets, and that concurs with experience. So when you actually are pushing like poles together, you are actually feeling the rushing of fragmented space. So how does this model work to reproduce an electric current? In this diagram, we have a lot more electrons in one unit volume of metal compared to the other. This is an electric potential difference. Let's look at one electron within this environment. It sees all of the wavelets, repulsion forces, the electric fields of the other electrons add up to push in one direction. As it is shunted in that direction, it finds a stable orientation. The directionally stable orientation is that where the space enters at the front and is ejected at the back. As it is pushed in this direction, the pressure escalates at the front face. This swells the vortices. Overall, this increase in size and speed gives the electron more energy. This increases the size of the magnetic field. Furthermore, with all the electrons travelling in the same direction, these magnetic fields add together. So that's how, in simplified cause and effect terms, electricity flows, and that is how electromagnetism is produced. So if this gets enough views, I will do another one. If it gets enough likes, I'll do another one, which will go into photon production and electromagnetic attraction, gravity, etc., etc. I think if you built these leapfrogging vortices in a virtual sense, in a computer, you could get them to replicate all of these behaviors. Whether it holds out forever, we don't know. I can't help but be extremely optimistic about this. So if you're interested in putting some work into a collaborative virtual reality model, please set up a Reddit page called Newbury Model. And if you want to set up a discussion page, please set up a Reddit page called Newbury Discussion. If you enjoyed this video and want to help me out, please consider pressing like, subscribe, or purchasing the book via the Kickstarter link I've got below. Thanks to me, guys. Until the next time. Cheers.